can make a lot of bad art to get to the good art.
Can you tell us about yourself?
I'm Rebecca Aguirre, and I'm an artist living in Southern California. My background is printmaking, but I really work in lots of different media and materials now.
How have your life experiences shaped your art?
Well, definitely motherhood has had a huge influence for me. It kind of actually stopped me from making art for a few years when my daughter was really young. It felt impossible to have time and to have the headspace to really think through what I was making. And I got back to it also because of her. So when she was a toddler playing with Play-Doh, I started playing with her right alongside her and was like, wait a second, what can I do with this? So that was sort of what got me into what I've been doing for the last few years, which is I still do work with Play-Doh, and I've always been a two-dimensional artist. So for me, I was look at the colors and the texture, and then I kind of squish it so it's flat. I'm I don't want it to be 3D, even though it's clay. So I was with Play-Doh for a long time, and now I've been using polymer clay. And then the images I use are also inspired by my daughter, just seeing her play. But I realized recently that water also keeps coming back to my work, and water has been something that's been a thread through my whole life. My dad was actually a water quality engineer for the Environmental Protection Agency, so I kind of grew up conserve water and always sort of worried about pollution and that kind of thing.
What's your creative process like?
For me, materials are really important, and both in the meaning they hold, that everything has a history. So materials have been somewhere, they mean something. So that is always sort of in my head when I'm using something to create, but then also just the color of it, the texture of it, what does it look and feel like? So where do the meaning and then the aesthetics, the beauty and elements of art and principles of design, where do those things kind of come together? So those are always in my head, and usually that starts with play and experimenting. And with Play-Doh, it's okay, how do I make this into a painting? It's Play-Doh. How can I make a Play-Doh painting? So that will be lots of play and experimentation. I almost treat it as a messy version of a scientific process. I'll make 5 different Play-Doh paintings and use different glues or different adhesives and see which one works the best, and then leave them for different amounts of time and see what happens. So there is this sort of experimentation involved, but then there's also, once I kind of figure out a process and materials that work, I do really plan things out, and I'm okay, this is the method that works. And with images, a lot of that is just taking a million photos and then looking through them and picking out the ones that jump out at me, sometimes mixing them, maybe I like this half of that photo and I'll kind of cut them together to make the image I want. And then I actually, when I'm doing clay work, I print the photo to the exact size I want it and put it underneath glass. So I work on glass when I'm making clay paintings.
How do you deal with frustrations?
I'm definitely a perfectionist, which I'm constantly kind of trying to get past. I'll get to a point where I'm almost overworking something and I need to just step back. I think when it gets there, one of the things I do is that I always have lots of ideas that I haven't had time to create, and also lots of things in process. So I'll have, different pieces that are at different stages of being done. So if one is not working, I can step away and work on something else, or I can step away and do something completely different. I can go for a walk or play with my kid. So just kind of stepping back from it if you get to that frustration point. I feel with the clay work, I don't get frustrated very often now because I have kind of figured out a method that works. And then I think also realizing that what's in my head is probably not going to be quite what's in front of me. And that's okay. What I create in front of me might actually be even better, even cooler and more interesting than what I had in my mind.
What advice do you have for kid artists?
One big piece of advice is just keep making it, keep practicing. It really is nobody is born an amazing artist. It's a skill you have to practice. It takes work. So keep making art. If it's something you love, keep trying different materials, different methods. So there's sort of like this double advice. Keep making art, but also like don't be afraid to try something new. And like we were talking about before, don't be afraid to fail. Let those sort of failures or like the bad art teach you something and let you kind of figure out. Like for me, what helps is thinking about it as this sort of science experiment. Like, okay, that experiment didn't work, but I learned that that method doesn't work, or those materials don't fit together, or those colors maybe don't work well together.